Greer Whitlock set her empty bowl down and asked, softly, for a bite. Her voice didn't travel far just across the long dining table, where men with cracked knuckles and worn hats ate like the world belonged to them. The cook stood stiff beside the iron stove, lips pressed thin, ladle dripping slow, as if even the stew didn't want to be generous. Greer kept her hands folded in her lap to hide the tremble, to hide how badly she wanted to snatch anything warm and run. If she sounded too hungry, if she looked too desperate, they would smell it on her the way dogs smelled fear. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The cook's eyes flicked to the pantry ledger on the counter, then to Greer, like Greer herself was another line item. Supplies are counted, the woman said. If you weren't at the table when the bowls went out, you wait. Greer swallowed. Waiting was something she knew how to do. She'd waded through empty cupboards in a city rooming house, waded through the long line at the church steps, waded through letters that never came back. But this was different. This was a ranch house on Christmas Eve, and she was supposed to be the reason there was a place at the table at all. A man at the far end snorted into his spoon. Another laughed, low and mean, like it was the easiest entertainment he'd had all week. Greer kept her chin level. She had learned, years ago, that the quickest way to lose what little dignity you had was to beg for it. She looked down at the bowl, again clean as a mirror, reflecting lamplight and the pale blur of her own face. It made her look like a ghost at a feast. "Ma'am," she said again, careful, "I rode all day." You rode in a stagecoach," the man nearest her corrected, dragging his words like spurs. He didn't look at her with curiosity. He looked at her like a purchase that had arrived missing a piece. Greer's fingers tightened together. She could taste iron in her mouth, where her teeth pressed her tongue. She forced herself not to glance around for help. A mail-order bride didn't have allies on her first night. She had watchers. Someone shifted behind her, boots scuffing wood. The room changed the way a pond changed when a shadow crossed it. Greer felt it before she saw it, men straightening, shoulders tightening, laughter dying mid-breath. She lifted her eyes. Beckett Rourke stood near the end of the table, hat still on, coat dusted with trail grit, jaw dark with stubble that made him look like he'd forgotten how to rest. He didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. The silence did it for him. His gaze went first to the bowls, to the steam curling from them, then to Greer's empty one. He didn't blink. "What's this?" he asked. No one answered immediately. Even the cook's ladle paused midair. Greer should have been relieved, he had noticed. But the attention hit like a bright lantern in a dark alley. If he was angry, it wasn't just the cook who would pay for it. It could be her. A man who ordered a bride by letter could be kind, or could be the kind of man who believed kindness was something he was owed. Beckett's eyes found hers, and the sting of being looked at so directly made Greer's ribs tighten. His stare wasn't leering, wasn't amused. It was measuring, yes, but in a way that said he took the world seriously. Greer stood because she didn't know what else to do with her body. "Mr. Rourke," she said. The men watched her like they expected her to curtsy, like they expected her to be grateful and small. Beckett didn't look away. Greer Whitlock? Her name in his mouth sounded heavier than it ever had in hers. Yes. He pulled out a chair at the head of the table and sat without taking off his hat. He set his plate down thick meat, cornbread, a scoop of beans like he'd claimed his piece of the night. Then he pushed the plate, slow, across the wood toward her. "Sit," he said. Greer stared at the plate like it was a trick. "Sir, sit," he repeated, voice lower, firmer. Not cruel, certain. She eased back down into her chair. The men didn't resume eating. No one wanted to be the one chewing when Beckett Rourke spoke. He tipped his chin at her empty bowl. "You haven't been served. I was told I should wait. Beckett's gaze slid to the cook. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The cook's mouth tightened. "We've been short," she said. The men have 2 hands," Beckett cut in. "They can ladle their own if it comes to that." A few of them shifted, offended. One of them, broad shoulders, scar at his cheek, let out a thin laugh, like he'd been waiting all day for a fight. Greer's stomach clenched. She didn't want to fight. Not because she was afraid of blood, she'd seen enough of it in alleys and sick rooms, but because she knew what happened to women who caused trouble in a place where men already believed they were trouble. Beckett picked up his fork, cut a piece of meat, and placed it into Greer's empty bowl. He did it like it was the simplest thing in the world. Then he added cornbread, then beans, and finally, with a flick of his wrist, he poured gravy over it until it steamed. "Eat," he said. Greer stared at the bowl, as if it might vanish if she moved too fast. "You don't have to," he added, and there it was, something in his voice that sounded like a man who believed consent mattered even when nobody else in the room did. "But if you want it, it's yours." Greer's throat tightened so suddenly it startled her. Her pride rose like a fist. She wasn't a stray dog, wasn't a charity case. But hunger wasn't pride. Hunger was a fact. She picked up her spoon with fingers that felt too stiff, too numb, and took the smallest bite she could manage. Warmth spread through her mouth like a hymn. Her eyes burned. She blinked fast and kept eating anyway. Across the table, the scar-cheeked man leaned back. "Well," he said, voice thick with mockery, "look at that. Christmas miracle. Boss feeds his bride right off his own plate." A ripple of uneasy laughter. Not as loud as before. Beckett didn't react. He only watched Greer eat, as if he was making sure she could without choking. The scar-cheeked man kept going. "She even say thank you? Or is she too fine for—" "Cade," Beckett said. "One word." The man stopped like he'd been struck. Greer glanced up. Cade. Foreman, then. The kind of man who ran things when the owner wasn't there. The kind of man who didn't like being reminded he wasn't the owner. Beckett set his fork down. "If you want to talk, you can talk to me." Not to her. Cade's eyes flicked to Greer, then away. "Didn't mean harm." "You did." Silence again. Greer kept eating, slow now, deliberate. She refused to be rushed. She refused to look grateful like a child. But she couldn't ignore the way her body unfurled in relief with every bite. Beckett turned his attention to the rest of the table. "You men have work before sunup," he said. "Finish your meal, then go." A few of them looked startled at being dismissed. The ranch house table was the one place they could linger and feel important. Being told to leave felt like being told their opinions didn't matter. Cade's jaw worked. "It's Christmas Eve." Beckett's eyes stayed flat. "Then sleep like it is." One by one they rose, chairs scraping. No one threw a word at Greer on the way out. They didn't dare. When the last boots faded down the hall, the ranch house felt larger, too much space, too much quiet. The cook remained by the stove, arms folded tight. She didn't look at Greer. "I'll wash up," she muttered. Beckett nodded once. Not permission. Dismissal. When the cook left, Greer realized she could hear her own spoon against the bowl. She hated the sound of it, too loud, too needy. Beckett sat across from her, elbows on the table, hands clasped. He hadn't eaten any of what remained on his plate. Greer's cheeks warmed. "You should eat," she said. "I will." "Then I'm watching you," he said plainly. Greer froze. He lifted a brow, like he understood exactly how the words sounded. "To make sure you're not pretending you don't want it." Heat rose to her eyes again, but this time it wasn't humiliation. It was something fierce and confusing. Greer set her spoon down. "I'm not pretending," she said. Beckett's mouth twitched, not a smile, but something close. "Good," Greer swallowed. "Is this how you greet a bride?" He studied her face like he was reading fine print. "How do you want to be greeted?" The question caught her off guard. Men didn't ask what she wanted. They told her what they expected. Greer took a breath. The stew had warmed her enough to make courage possible. "With respect," she said. "And honesty." Beckett nodded once, like he'd been waiting for her to say something that proved she wasn't a maid of lace and size. "Honesty," he repeated. "All right." His gaze shifted to her hand small, calloused at the fingers for work that wasn't supposed to be in a woman as past. Greer tucked them under the table instinctively. Beckett noticed. He didn't comment. "Did you read my letters?" he asked. "Yes." "All of them?" "Yes." "Even the last?" Greer hesitated. The last letter had been shorter, written like he'd run out of time or patience. It had included the train money, the stage directions, and one line that had made her heart flutter and tighten at the same time. "I need you here before Christmas is done." "Yes," she said. Beckett exhaled through his nose. "Then you know why I sent for you." Greer kept her face still, though her stomach nodded. "You said you wanted a wife." "I said I wanted a partner." Greer lifted her chin. "Those aren't always the same." His eyes sharpened, but not in anger. "In respect, no," he agreed. "They aren't." Greer waited, refusing to fill the silence for him. Beckett's fingers tightened together. "My ranch is tied up in paper," he said. "Banknotes, clauses, promises made by a dead man who thought he knew what would keep this place standing." Greer's heart thudded. She didn't like the sound of desperation in a man's voice. It made men reckless. Beckett continued, steady. "My father's will left the land to me, but only if I was married by Christmas Day." Greer's breath caught. "Otherwise," Beckett said, "it passes to my cousin." Greer stared at him. "So I'm—" "A condition," he said, not unkindly. "A requirement." The words hit like cold water. Greer should have known. No man with a ranch like this needed to buy a bride unless he needed something more than company. Her pride flared again, sharper now. "Then why did you feed me?" she demanded. "If I'm just ink on a document?" Beckett's gaze didn't flinch. "Because you're not just ink," he said. "But I won't lie to you about why you were brought here." Greer's throat ached. She hated that she wanted to believe him. Beckett leaned back. "If you want to leave," he said, "I'll give you money for the trip. No one will stop you. I won't chase you. I won't speak your name like you owe me something." Greer blinked. No one offered her exits. Not clean ones. "And if I stay?" she asked, voice rough. "Then we do this with terms," Beckett said. "Your terms, too." Greer's pulse quickened. "You'd accept my terms." "I have to," he said simply. "Or you're not a partner. You're a prisoner." The word made Greer's spine stiffen. She hadn't used that word for herself in years, but it lived in her bones anyway. Greer looked down at the bowl. It was nearly empty now. "You don't know me," she said. "I know you rode 2 states to get here," Beckett said. "I know you didn't turn back when you could. I know you asked for food without raising your voice. That tells me enough to start." Greer's chest tightened. She didn't want to cry in front of him. She didn't want him to mistake tears for weakness. She stood because sitting felt like surrender. "I'll help you," she said. Beckett's eyes narrowed. "Help me how?" Greer's hands curled into fists. "I'll be your wife," she said, forcing the words out steady. "For the paper, for the will, for your ranch." Beckett didn't move. "And for you?" Greer's throat worked. "For me," she admitted. "I didn't come here to be a decoration. I came here because I'm tired of living like a shadow." Beckett's gaze lingered on her face. "Then tell me your terms," he said. Greer inhaled. Terms meant she had power, even if it was small. "First," she said, "you don't touch me unless I say yes." Beckett nodded. "Second," she continued, "I work. I contribute. I want to sit in a parlor while your men pretend I'm a doll they can break." Beckett's mouth hardened. "You won't." "Third," Greer said, If I decide this isn't safe for me, I leave. With my own money, my own things, and no one hunts me." Beckett's eyes held hers. "Agreed." Greer's chest rose and fell. She hadn't expected him to agree so fast. She'd expected bargaining, threats. "What are yours?" she asked. Beckett's jaw worked once, like he hated needing anything. "Honesty," he said. "No lies about who you are. No surprises that bring trouble down on this ranch." Greer's stomach tightened. She forced herself to nod. "All right." Beckett watched her too closely, like he'd felt the hitch in her breath. Greer stepped away from the table, aiming for the wash basin, giving herself something to do with her hands. The water was cold. She didn't flinch. Beckett rose. "I'll send for the preacher," he said. Greer's head snapped up. "Tonight?" "Tonight," Beckett said. "Christmas Day starts when the clock says it does. I don't gamble with minutes." Greer's pulse jumped. Marriage by candlelight with men who hated her listening through walls. There was nothing romantic about that. There was only urgency. "And if I'm not ready?" she asked. Beckett held her gaze. "Then you're free," he said. "But the ranch won't be." Greer wiped her hands on her skirt. Her stomach twisted not from hunger now, but from the weight of choice. "Who is your cousin?" she asked. Beckett's eyes darkened. "Luther Price." The name meant nothing to Greer. Beckett's tone made it mean everything. "And the bank?" she asked. Beckett's mouth tightened. "Barrow and Sloane." Greer repeated it silently, committing it to memory. She had learned to memorize the names of men who wanted things from her. Beckett turned toward the hall, but Cade appeared first silent, like he'd been waiting nearby. Greer's spine stiffened. Cade nodded at Beckett, eyes hard. "Preacher can be fetched," he said. "But it won't matter if the license ain't signed." Beckett's gaze flicked sharp. "It's signed." Cade's lips pulled thin. "County clerk don't sign after dark." And the deputy wanted to stamp it without seeing the bride's name in his book. Greer's throat tightened. "There's a book?" Beckett's eyes returned to her. "A marriage ledger," he said. "It's a formality." Cade snorted. "Formality that'll have you losing the ranch if it ain't done proper." Beckett's jaw flexed. "We'll do it proper." Cade leaned on the back of a chair, too comfortable in Beckett's house. "Deputy came earlier," he said. "Said he'd be back." Greer's fingers went numb. "Earlier. Back." Beckett's eyes narrowed. "For what?" Cade's gaze slid to Greer, then away. "Didn't say, just asked about the stage. Asked if any new folks came through." Greer's heartbeat stuttered. She kept her face still, but her mind raced fast, practiced. Deputy asking about newcomers could mean anything. Lost cattle, stolen horses, a man missing. Or it could mean what Greer had spent a year fearing. Beckett watched her like he could hear the panic she was swallowing. "Greer," he said, quieter. She lifted her eyes. "Is there something you didn't tell me?" he asked. Greer's mouth went dry. She could lie. She was good at lying when lying kept her alive. But she just agreed to honesty. Greer's throat worked. "There are things," she said carefully, "that belong to my past. Things I didn't run from because I was guilty, but because I was tired of being used." Beckett's gaze stayed fixed. "That doesn't answer me." Greer's nails dug into her palm. "I'm not wanted for harming anyone," she said. "If that's what you mean." Cade's laugh was sharp. "That's a mighty specific denial." Beckett's head turned like a whip. "Enough." Cade held up his hands, mock innocent. "Just saying," he drawled. "A man ought to know what he bought." The word bought hit Greer like a slap. She stepped forward before she could stop herself. "He didn't buy me," she said. Cade's eyes flicked down her, then up again. "Stage ticket says otherwise." Greer's voice shook, but she didn't back down. "If you want to call me purchased," she said, "say it to my face and see how it tastes." Cade's mouth twitched, like he liked the fight. Beckett moved between them without touching Greer, blocking Cade's view as if drawing a boundary with his own body. "She's under my protection," he said. Greer's throat tightened again. Protection sounded too much like ownership. But Beckett's stance didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a shield. Cade's gaze hardened. "Protection is expensive," he said, "especially with the kind of eyes watching this ranch." Beckett's voice stayed even. "Then go back to the bunkhouse and mind your men." Cade hesitated. The room held its breath. Then he tipped his head in a way that wasn't respect. It was threat disguised as obedience. "As you say," he murmured. He left. Greer realized her hands were shaking again. Beckett turned to her. "You didn't answer," he said. Greer swallowed hard. Honesty. But not all at once. Not with a room full of sharp edges. "I'll tell you," she said. But not with him listening. Beckett's gaze flicked toward the hall as if he could see through walls. "Fair." He nodded once. "Come." Greer followed him down the hall, her boots quiet on the boards. The ranch house held the smell of soap and wood smoke and something else, a tiredness that seeped into the walls from years of people doing what they had to. Beckett led her to a smaller room off to the side, not grand, not delicate. A room with a desk, a few shelves, papers stacked in careful piles. Business. Survival. He gestured to a chair. "Sit if you want." Greer stayed standing. Standing made her feel less trapped. Beckett leaned his hip against the desk, arms crossed. "Tell me," he said. Greer stared at the floorboards. She could pick a knot in the wood and focus on it, make it a lifeline. "My name is Greer Whitlock," she began. Beckett's eyes didn't move. "But I wasn't born with it," she said. His jaw tightened, just slightly. "I took it," Greer admitted. "Not from a good place. From a place I worked in. A place that paid girls to smile while men decided what they were worth." Beckett's stare hardened, not at her, but at the world she described. "I didn't steal from anyone," Greer rushed on. "Not money, not goods. I took a name because I needed a door that would open for me." She realized what she'd said and winced. Door. She hadn't meant to. But the idea was true names were doors in their own way. Beckett didn't correct her. He only asked, "Why?" Greer's throat tightened. "Because the name I had," she said, "kept getting me hurt." Beckett's eyes narrowed. "By who?" Greer's stomach clenched. Men who thought a woman with nothing was something they could own. Beckett's mouth went hard. He pushed off the desk. He didn't pace. He didn't loom. He just moved closer until he was near enough that Greer could feel the heat of him, near enough that his calm felt like a wall between her and everything else. "What trouble follows you?" he asked. Greer's heartbeat hammered. She could tell him the whole truth, that a man in St. Louis had accused her of a crime when she refused to be his, that he'd used the law like a weapon, that a deputy with his pockets full of someone else's money had begun asking questions, that Greer had run, not because she was guilty, but because she'd learned what happened when a poor woman tried to prove innocence to rich men. But saying it out loud would make it real in this room, too. Greer forced herself to meet Beckett's eyes. "A man," she said. "A powerful one." He didn't like hearing no. Beckett's nostrils flared once. "Name." Greer hesitated. Beckett's voice lowered. "Greer," she exhaled. "Elliot Crane," she said. The name sounded too fancy for a ranch house, like something that belonged in a city office with glass and ink. Beckett repeated it, slow, memorizing. What did he do? Greer's nails dug into her palm again. "He tried to make me disappear without making it look like he'd done anything at all." Beckett's jaw flexed. "And you ran." "I left," Greer corrected. "I chose to live." Beckett stared at her. Then he nodded once, sharp. "All right," he said. Greer blinked. "That's it." Beckett's eyes held hers. "Do you expect me to call you a liar?" Greer's laugh came out broken. "Men do. When it's easier." Beckett's voice stayed steady. "It's not easier," he said. "It's cowardice." Greer's chest tightened again. She couldn't tell if she wanted to cry or punch something. Beckett stepped back, giving her space. "If the deputy comes," he said, "I'll speak to him." Greer's throat went dry. "You don't know what you're stepping into." Beckett's gaze went flat. "This ranch is what I'm stepping into. Every day." Greer stared at him, heart thudding. Beckett reached into a drawer of the desk and pulled out a folded document paper thick official. A marriage license, blank in places. He set it on the desk like it weighed 100 pounds. "This is the line between me keeping my father's land," he said, tapping the paper, "and Luther Price taking it." Greer swallowed. Beckett's eyes lifted to hers. "But you are not a line," he said. "You are a person. So I'll ask you once, and I mean it." His voice softened, just a fraction. "Do you want to do this?" Greer's stomach twisted. Want? She didn't know when she'd last been asked what she wanted. She thought of the rooming house she'd left behind, the thin walls, the cold nights, the way her body had learned to brace for footsteps in the hallway. She thought of the letter Beckett had sent, no poetry, no promises of love, just a plain offer. A home, a partnership, respect. She thought of the stew in her belly and how it had made her feel human again. Greer drew a breath. "Yes," she said. Beckett held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Then we do it right," he said. Greer's mouth tightened. "Right," she echoed. Beckett took his hat off then, finally, and set it on the desk. In the lamplight, she could see a faint scar near his temple, half hidden by hair. A mark of something he didn't speak about. "We'll need witnesses," he said. "Cook will do. Cade will do if he behaves." Greer's stomach tightened at the thought. "And the deputy," Beckett added, "if he shows. It might be better to have the law see it done." Greer's pulse jumped. Better for him, not for her. Beckett seemed to read it in her face. "I won't let anyone take you from this house," he said. Greer's breath hitched. "I didn't say you could," she said, forcing strength into her voice. Beckett's mouth twitched again, faint. "Good," he murmured. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small tin box. He set it beside the license. Greer stared at it. Beckett lifted the lid. Inside lay 2 rings, not gold, not fancy. Plain bands, the kind a man might have made at a blacksmith's shop when he couldn't afford anything else. "They were my mother's," Beckett said. Greer's chest tightened. "You kept them." Beckett's gaze stayed on the rings. "I kept everything that mattered," he said. Greer looked at him. "Do you miss her?" Beckett's jaw tightened. "Every day," he said. The honesty of it made Greer's throat ache. Beckett closed the box and slid it away. "I'll fetch the preacher," he said. "You should wash your face. Rest a minute. Whatever you need." Greer nodded, though she didn't feel like resting. She felt like she was standing on a cliff edge, and someone had asked her to dance. Beckett paused, hand on the desk. "Greer," she looked back. His voice dropped. "If Cade says anything to you again," he said, "you tell me." Greer's pride flared. "I can handle a man like Cade." Beckett's eyes sharpened. "I know you can," he said. "That's why I'm asking you to let me handle him anyway." Greer swallowed. Protection or partnership? She wasn't sure where the line was. "All right," she said. Beckett nodded and left the room. Greer stood alone with the license on the desk. Ink and paper. 2 lines. 2 names. She stared at the blank space where hers would go. Greer Whitlock. A stolen name. She pressed her hand against her chest, feeling her heart hammer. Don't be weak, she told herself. Don't be foolish. But she was already here. She left the office and moved toward the washroom. The basin water stung her fingers. She splashed her face and stared at her reflection in the small mirror above the pitcher. Her eyes looked too big in the lamplight. Her hair had come loose from the pins she'd set with care before leaving town. Strands clung to her cheeks. She looked like a woman who traveled far. She looked like a woman who still hadn't decided if she was running or arriving. A sound drifted down the hall, voices low, urgent. Greer paused. Cade's voice. The cook's, then Beckett's, quieter, clipped. Greer moved toward the sound, careful, not wanting to be caught listening, not wanting to be helpless. She reached the corner where the hall opened into the main room. Beckett stood near the table, speaking to the cook. The cook held a folded paper in her hand, eyes wide. A rider brought it, the cook said. Left it with the supplies. Beckett took the paper and unfolded it. Greer's stomach dropped before she could even read it, because she recognized the look on Beckett's face as his eyes moved across the lines. It was the look of a man who'd just been handed a match while standing in a room full of hay. Cade leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Well?" he asked. Beckett didn't answer. Greer stepped forward, unable to stop herself. "What is it?" she asked. Beckett's eyes lifted to hers. For the first time since she arrived, his calm cracked. "Deputy is coming," he said. Greer's breath caught. Cade smiled without warmth. "Told you," he murmured. Beckett's eyes flicked to Cade, warning. Then back to Greer. Beckett held the paper out. Greer took it with fingers that felt numb. The words blurred for a moment. She forced her eyes to focus. A notice. A request. A name. Greer's name. Her stomach turned. "Who sent this?" she whispered. Beckett's voice was low. "Barrow and Sloane," he said. Greer looked up, confused. Beckett's jaw clenched. "They know you're here," he said. "And they want you witnessed in front of the deputy before they recognize this marriage." Greer's throat tightened. "Why?" Beckett's gaze didn't soften. "Because," he said, "they're looking for any excuse to call this fraudulent." Cade's chuckle scraped. "Or," he said, "maybe they already know the bride ain't who she says she is." Greer's blood went cold. Beckett moved fast one step toward Cade, voice sharp. "Say another word, and you'll find yourself without a job on Christmas." Cade's smile faded, but his eyes stayed bright with satisfaction. Greer's hands shook as she stared at the notice. She could feel the old panic crawling up her throat, the memory of men with badges pretending to be righteous. Beckett turned to the cook. "Where's the deputy?" he asked. Cook swallowed. "In town," she said. "He said he'd ride out if the stage brought anyone new." Greer's heartbeat hammered. If the deputy came and asked questions. If he had a message from St. Louis. If Crane had reached this far. Greer's knees went weak. She gripped the paper harder. Beckett looked at her, voice lowering. "Greer," he said, "look at me." She forced her eyes up. Beckett's gaze held hers. "Whatever happens," he said, "you don't speak unless you want to. You understand?" Greer blinked, confused. He continued, steady. "If he asks you anything that feels wrong, you tell me. If you want to stop this marriage, we stop. If you want to go through with it, we go through with it. Your choice." Her chest tightened. Choice. That word again. Before Greer could answer, a heavy set of footsteps approached down the hall, slow, official. The cook's face drained of color. Cade straightened, satisfied. Beckett stepped closer to Greer without touching her, his presence a shield. A man's voice called out from the hall, firm and practiced. "Mr. Rourke," the voice said. "Deputy Marsh, I need a word." Greer's fingers went ice cold around the paper. Beckett didn't move. "You have it," he called back. The deputy entered the room, broad shoulders, winter coat, badge catching the lamplight. His eyes swept the space, then landed on Greer. Not curious, recognizing. Greer's stomach dropped. Deputy Marsh's gaze narrowed. "Ma'am," he said, "are you Greer Whitlock?" Beckett's voice cut in, calm but dangerous. "She doesn't have to answer that." The deputy's eyebrows lifted. "In my county, she does if there's business that concerns the law." Greer's mouth went dry. Deputy Marsh reached into his coat and pulled out another folded paper. He opened it, and Greer saw, from where she stood, the faint outline of a Seal City, Inc., not county, St. Louis. Her lungs locked. Deputy Marsh's eyes stayed on her as he spoke. "Ma'am," he said again, slower, "I'll ask once more. Are you Greer Whitlock, or are you someone else? This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. Greer's lungs wouldn't pull air the way they should. Deputy Marsh stood a few paces inside the room, one gloved hand holding that city-stamped paper as if it carried truth simply because it carried a seal. Lamplight flashed off the badge at his chest whenever he shifted. He wasn't looking at the cook or Cade now. He was looking at Greer like he'd already decided what she was. Beckett Rourke's voice cut clean through the stillness. "She doesn't have to answer that." The deputy's gaze slid to Beckett, measuring him the way he might measure a gatepost for rot. "In my county," Marsh said, "folks answer when the law asks." Greer felt the room lean toward the badge. That was how it always went. A badge didn't need proof to make people step back. Beckett didn't step back. He didn't raise his voice either. "She answers when she chooses." Cade's mouth pulled into a thin line, pleased and poisonous at once, like he'd been waiting to watch someone break. Greer's fingers tightened around the bank. Notice Beckett had handed her. Paper, just paper, yet it could still turn a stomach, still make a woman feel hunted. She hated how quickly her body remembered, the tightness in her throat, the way her skin wanted to crawl out of itself, the instinct to apologize for existing. Marsh lifted his chin at Greer. "Ma'am, I've got a request out of St. Louis. They're asking for a woman by that name." Request, Greer thought. Not warrant, not order. But men like Crane had always preferred requests, because they let other men do the dirty work while pretending their hands stayed clean. What kind of request? Beckett asked. Marsh's lips twitched. Depends how cooperative we're feeling. Greer heard the threat in it, the way she'd heard it in alleyways and back rooms cooperate. Or you'll learn what power does when it gets impatient. Beckett's eyes went hard. That's not an answer. Marsh snapped the paper once, as if the sound could replace law. It's a notice. Says a woman might be traveling under a name that isn't hers. Says she may be tied to a matter of fraud. Fraud. The word landed on the table like spilled ink dark, spreading, meant to stain everything it touched. Cade let out a soft laugh. Well now. Greer's stomach turned, but she kept her chin level. She would not beg. She would not shrink. Not here. Not after the warmth of stew had reached her bones and reminded her she was still a human being who deserved to eat. Beckett's gaze didn't leave the deputy. Who sent it? City clerk's office, Marsh said, tapping the seal again like it was a holy mark. Beckett's mouth tightened. And you rode out here on Christmas Eve because of a city clerk. I rode out here because Barrow and Sloane asked me to witness whatever happens next, Marsh said. Greer's heartbeat tripped. The bank again, always the bank squeezing into rooms it didn't belong in. Beckett glanced at Greer, voice lowering, not soft but careful. You don't have to answer him. Greer tasted metal where her teeth pressed her tongue. If she stayed silent, they'd call it guilt. If she spoke, they'd twist her words into a rope. She looked at Beckett and saw something she didn't expect. He wasn't trying to command her. He was offering her the choice, like it mattered. Greer stepped forward. Her knees wanted to fold, but she forced them straight. Deputy, she said. Marsh's brows lifted as if he'd been waiting for the sound of surrender. Greer didn't give it to him. I will tell you this, she said, steadying her voice with sheer will. I have not harmed anyone. I have not stolen money, and I have not come here to trick this man out of his land. That's your side, Marsh said. It's the truth, Greer answered. Cade's laugh scraped. Truth's a fancy coat for a lot of things. Greer turned her head toward him, slow and deliberate. And cruelty's a cheap coat for a coward. Cade's eyes flashed. For a second, Greer saw the man beneath the swagger mien, hungry for dominance. He wanted her frightened, because frightened women were easy to steer. Beckett's voice dropped like a hammer. "Cade, leave." Cade's chin lifted. "You want me gone while a deputy's here?" "I want you gone because you're poisoning the air." Cade's smile showed teeth. "You can't run this place without me." Beckett didn't blink. "Try me." Silence tightened. Greer could feel it in her throat, in her ribs, like a corset laced too tight. Before Cade could decide whether to push, footsteps sounded in the hall, again light, quick, too clean. A thin man entered with a satchel and a polished, kind of calm, that didn't belong on a ranch. His coat looked expensive. His gloves looked unused. He tipped his hat like manners were a weapon. Evening. Merrin Sloane, Barrow and Sloane. Greer's stomach sank. The bank had sent a face to go with the rope. Beckett's jaw flexed. "You rode out here at night. The bank doesn't sleep," Sloane said, and smiled as if it was charming instead of monstrous. Sloane's gaze flicked to Greer. It wasn't a man looking at a woman. It was an accountant looking at a liability. "I understand there's a marriage to be conducted," Sloane said. "And I understand there are questions." Beckett's voice stayed flat. "State your business." Sloane opened his satchel and produced papers stamped, tied, official. "Your father's will. Your conditions." The bank's interest. He laid them on the table like he owned the wood. Greer's skin prickled. Beckett had spoken of paper like it was a noose. Now she saw the hands tightening it. "The bank will recognize your marriage if it is lawful, witnessed, and entered into the county ledger," Sloane said. Beckett's gaze sharpened. "That's the plan." Sloane's smile held. "We must be certain the bride is who she claims. If she is not, the contract is void." Greer felt the men at the edges of the night crane. Sloane, Luther Price using the same language. Void, contract, interest. As if a woman could be erased with a stamp. Beckett's voice turned colder. "She's not your property to verify." Sloane's smile didn't falter. "No, but your ranch is." The words slapped the room. Greer saw Beckett's knuckles whiten, controlled fury held in place by discipline. Greer stepped forward again, because if she let them talk over her, she would become paper on their table. "Mr. Sloane," she said. Sloane looked at her like he hadn't expected her to have a voice. "Yes, ma'am?" "You have papers," Greer said. "Then you also have our correspondence. Compare it. Compare the letters. Compare my signature over months. If you believe I'm a stranger who wandered in to steal land, prove it." Sloane's nostrils flared slightly. "Handwriting can be imitated. So can stamps," Greer said, and watched his eyes narrow. Marsh shifted his weight, hand near his belt, as if truth was a thing that might bite. "I will tell you one thing you can witness with your own eyes," Greer said. "I told Mr. Rourke I took this name. Before the marriage, he still asked my terms. He still offered me a way out. I agreed anyway." Sloane's smile thinned. "Consent does not replace legality." Greer's throat tightened. "And coercion doesn't create legality either," she said. "But men have called it legal for years." Cade's low laugh tried to break the tension. "She's got a mouth." Beckett's eyes cut to him. "Cade," Cade quieted, but Greer could feel him watching, waiting for a crack. Sloane leaned closer to the papers. "Mr. Rourke, you have until sunrise to present a bride whose identity can be verified. If you cannot, the bank will recognize Mr. Luther Price under the will." Greer's stomach dropped. Sunrise. Minutes. A man's inheritance decided on a clock like a cattle auction. Beckett's voice stayed steady, but Greer heard the rage in the bones of it. "You invited him." Sloane didn't deny it. "We informed him." "It's his interest, too." Greer's breath caught. A cousin arriving like a vulture at dawn. Beckett straightened. "Get out." Sloane's smile sharpened. "You can order me off your land, but you can't order the bank to recognize your marriage." Beckett's eyes went icy. "Then I'll order you off my land anyway." Marsh's hand hovered nearer his belt. "Easy." Greer could feel the room on a knife edge one wrong movement, and the whole thing would spill into violence. Beckett's voice turned dangerous, not loud. "Deputy, are you here to keep peace, or to help the bank steal what isn't theirs?" Marsh's jaw worked. "I'm here because there's a matter of fraud." "Fraud against who?" Greer asked, sharp. "The law," Marsh said. Greer's laugh came out bitter. "The law doesn't bleed when it's wronged," she said. "People do." Sloane's patience snapped thin. "This isn't a debate. Provide legal documentation, or postpone the marriage until verification." Postpone means lose, Greer thought. That was the point. Delay was their weapon. Beckett's jaw clenched. Postpone means Price takes it. Sloane lifted his hands, false sympathy. "Then perhaps you should not have waited until Christmas Eve to secure your future." Greer saw Beckett's control strain. She stepped in, not to save him, but to save them both from becoming the kind of story banks like to tell violent rancher, hysterical bride, law forced to intervene. "I have documentation," she said. Sloane's gaze snapped to her. "Do you?" Greer didn't let her voice shake. "Give me 5 minutes." Beckett's eyes flicked to her, warning and question. "Greer." She lifted her hand, palm out, asking him to trust her, not to speak over her, not to drag her into safety like she was a child. "I won't do anything I don't choose," she said quietly. Then she went down the hall. Her bag sat on the floor by the bed, a small island of what was hers. Greer knelt, hands trembling, and opened it. Inside, a spare dress, a comb, a cracked Bible, and the cloth bundle tied tight. That bundle was the last thing she kept hidden, because it was the last thing she had power over. The money, the papers, the little proof that she could survive without anyone's permission. She untied it. Papers, old receipts, a boarding house ledger slip, a bank book she'd guarded like a heart, and one letter she hated touching because it still made her skin crawl. Elliot Crane's handwriting. He'd written like a man who believed ink made him holy. Greer didn't read the whole thing again. She didn't let it pull her back into that room. She only held it, feeling the weight of what it represented. A rich man's promise to ruin her without dirtying his hands. She gathered the papers and returned to the dining room. The air felt colder. Beckett stood tall at the table, a quiet wall. Marsh and Sloane watched her like she was returning from a cliff. Greer set the papers down. "This is my stage ticket," she said, sliding it forward. "This is a receipt with my name in St. Louis for months. This is a letter from Elliot Crane." At the name, Sloane's eyes narrowed. Marsh leaned in despite himself. Greer held the letter up just enough for them to see the signature. "He threatened me," she said. "Not because I stole money. Because I refused him." Sloane's smile finally faltered. "Threats are not proof. They're motive," Greer said. "They explain why a city notice follows me like a shadow." Marsh's eyes moved over the letter again. Greer saw his certainty crack, just a hair, but it was there. Beckett's voice was low. "Deputy, is there an actual warrant?" Marsh hesitated too long. Sloane jumped in, smooth again. "The bank requires certainty." "That is all." Greer looked at Sloane. "You're not asking for certainty," she said. "You're asking for leverage." Sloane's eyes cooled. "Mind your tone." Greer's voice stayed steady. "You're in my home tonight," she said, and the word startled her even as it landed. Beckett's gaze snapped to her, a flash of surprise. Sloane repeated it, amused. "Home. Already?" Beckett's voice turned sharp. "Leave?" Sloane didn't move. "Without verification, the bank will—" "Then verify something else," Beckett cut in. Greer's breath caught. Beckett reached to the sideboard, pulled his own stack of ledgers, and slammed them onto the table. Cade's face drained of color. "These are Cade's accounts," Beckett said. "Inflated feed, ghost payroll. Double-billed supplies." Sloane's gaze sharpened, hungry now. The bank loved numbers. Numbers were the only truth it believed. Cade shoved off the wall, angry. That's a lie. Beckett's eyes stayed cold. Is it? Or are you used to people believing you because you talk loud? Marsh stepped half a pace, closer to Cade, sensing violence. Beckett pulled a smaller paper from the pile dirty, smudged. And this, he said, is your note. To Luther Price. Greer's stomach dropped. Sloane stared. Marsh's brows furrowed. Cade's jaw clenched so hard it looked painful. You don't know what that is. Then explain, Beckett said. Cade's eyes flicked to Sloane, then away when Sloane offered nothing. Cade's voice came rough, scrambling. I was warning him. That's all. Marsh's gaze hardened. Warning him about what? Cade's mouth opened. Then he made the mistake of trying to sound casual. About you being here, he snapped. And the moment the words left his mouth, Greer felt the floor shift under him. Marsh's eyes narrowed. About me? Cade swallowed. Beckett's voice went low. You've been carrying messages, he said. You've been setting this up. Marsh's face darkened. Pride pricked. He didn't like realizing he'd been used. If you want to press this, Marsh said to Beckett, we can take Cade in. Cade's eyes widened. Deputy, don't call me like we're friends, Marsh snapped, and Greer felt a strange relief. Not because Marsh was suddenly good, but because he was suddenly afraid of being seen. Beckett didn't waste the shift. Cade leaves now, he said. Under your watch. Cade spat, desperate. You think she's worth this? Greer's throat tightened. Worth. Purchased. Condition. Beckett's eyes went ice cold. This isn't about her being worth it, he said. This is about you being rotten. Marsh grabbed Cade's arm. Cade jerked once, but Marsh's grip tightened. Sloane's face tightened. This had not been part of his tidy plan. Beckett turned his gaze on Sloane. And you? Out, Sloane's eyes flashed. Mr. Rourke. You can come back in daylight, Beckett said, with proper papers. Or you can crawl back to your office and pretend you didn't threaten a woman in her own home. Sloane's jaw tightened. You're making an enemy. Beckett didn't blink. I already have enemies. Sloane's cold eyes slid to Greer like a promised future. Then he left. Marsh hauled Cade out after him. The door shut. Silence settled like ash. Greer's knees threatened to fold. She sat slowly, trying to make her hands stop shaking. In the quiet, she realized she'd been holding her breath since Marsh first spoke the word fraud. Beckett stood near her, close but not touching. Are you all right? No, Greer said, and a laugh broke out of her like a cough. But I'm still standing. Beckett's throat bobbed. I'm sorry, he said. For what? Greer asked, startled. For thinking I could pull you into my mess without it touching you, Beckett said. Greer swallowed. It was going to touch me anyway, she said. Men like Crane don't stop at county lines. At Crane's name, Beckett's eyes went hard. He won't take you from this house. Greer shook her head once. You can't promise that. Beckett's gaze held hers. No, he said. But I can promise I won't help him. The cook hovered near the stove, trembling. Mr. Rourke? Should I fetch the preacher? Greer's stomach flipped at the sudden closeness of the word preacher. Marriage. Vows. Paper. Beckett looked at Greer. Your choice. Greer stared at him. The room, the threats, the way Cade's smile had sharpened when the deputy arrived, none of it was safe. But Beckett had fed her when no one else would. He'd offered her an exit when men like Crane offered only traps. If she ran again, she'd keep running until her legs gave out. If she stayed, she might finally learn what it felt like to hold ground. Yes, Greer said. Fetch him. The cook hurried out. Beckett sat across from her, elbows on the table, voice low. We're not safe yet, he said. No, Greer agreed. He watched her carefully. Tell me what you didn't tell me. Greer's throat tightened. Truth had a cost, but hiding had a bigger one. My birth name. She paused, fighting the old reflex to swallow it down. "It's tied to a man who thinks he owns me," she said. "Crane used it like a chain. When I refused him, he decided I'd wear it as punishment." Beckett's jaw flexed. "Name," he said, not to demand it from her like Marsh had, but because he wanted the enemy labeled. Greer forced the words through. "Elliot Crane." Beckett repeated it once, slow, like he was carving it into wood. "I took Whitlock," Greer said, "because a kind woman once treated me like a person. She gave me food without making me feel like a stray. When she died, no one spoke her name. I took it so I could keep living like someone believed I deserved to." Beckett's eyes softened, then hardened again at the world. "Crane called it theft," Greer said. "Not because it was, but because he wanted a way to make me illegal." Beckett's mouth went tight. "If he shows here—" "No," Greer said, firm. Beckett blinked. Greer forced her voice steady. "We fight smart," she said. "We don't turn into men like him. We don't make violence the only language we speak." Beckett looked at her a beat, pride and fury wrestling in his face. Then he nodded once. "Smart." He stood and paced a small line by the hearth, like he needed motion to keep from breaking something. "Then we start by controlling the paper," he said. "Because paper's what the bank worships." Greer lifted her chin. "Copies," she said. Beckett stopped, looked at her. "Yes," he said, surprised. "Copies. Statements. Witnesses. Anything they can't erase with one clerk and one bribe." A knock came at the door a little, later heavy, official. Greer's heart jolted. Beckett opened it. Deputy Marsh stood there again, alone, holding a folded paper. "Ma'am," Marsh said to Greer, "you wanted a warrant." Greer's lungs locked. Marsh held it up. Sheriff signed. Clerk stamped. Beckett's voice went low. "For what?" "Detainment pending verification," Marsh said. "If she refuses to confirm her identity in front of witnesses." Beckett's eyes narrowed. "You got that in under an hour." Marsh's mouth tightened, and he slipped, just a hair. Law moves faster when money asks it to. Beckett's gaze went icy. Greer stepped forward beside Beckett before fear could turn into helplessness. "Then bring your witnesses," she said. "Here." Marsh blinked. "What?" Greer kept her voice calm. "Your warrant says detainment if I refuse to confirm," she said. "I won't refuse. I will confirm the identity I've lived under. I consent to marry Beckett Rourke tonight. If St. Louis wants more than that, they send proper papers." Marsh stared at her like she'd spoken a language he didn't expect a woman to know. Behind Greer, Beckett's presence stayed steady, not pushing, not pulling, just there. Marsh's jaw clenched. "Fine," he spat. "Preacher's coming anyway." Greer's pulse hammered. When Reverend Halden arrived, the room shifted again, less like a courtroom, more like a crossroads. Halden looked at Greer, gentle seriousness. "Ma'am, are you here of your own will?" Greer looked at Beckett. He didn't nod. He didn't prompt. He waited. "Yes," Greer said. "Of my own will. And you understand what marriage means?" Halden asked. Greer felt the weight of it, how the word had been used to trap women, how it had been used to silence them. She lifted her chin. "I understand what it means when two people choose it," she said. "And I have terms." Halden's eyebrows rose. Marsh scowled. Beckett spoke, calm and firm. Her terms matter, so Greer said them aloud, in front of badge and bank. "I keep my own wages from my own hands," she said. "I can write letters without permission. I can step outside this house without asking like a child. And if I ever say no, it means no." The Reverend's eyes softened. The cook's shoulders loosened, as if she'd been holding her own breath. Beckett nodded once. "Agreed," he said, and Greer felt something in her chest steady, like a knot untied. They signed. Greer's hand trembled, but her signature stayed steady. Before Beckett signed, he slid the paper toward her. "Read it," he said. Greer did, line by line, and something fierce rose in her respect for a man willing to be held to what he promised. When Beckett spoke his vows, he didn't offer flowers of language. He offered foundations. "I will treat you with respect," he said. "I will not touch you unless you want it. I will not make you small to make myself feel bigger." Greer's throat tightened until it hurt. When it was her turn, she forced her voice through the ache. "I will be honest," she said. "I will work beside you. I will not let fear make me cruel. And I will not let bank, badge, or family turn this into a cage." Beckett slid the plain band onto her finger, only after she lifted her hand to offer it. The metal felt cool, solid, real. Halden pronounced them married. When Halden said Beckett could kiss his bride if she consented, Beckett didn't move until Greer gave the slightest lift of her chin. The kiss was brief, respectful, and somehow it did more to steady Greer than all the papers on the table. It was touch without taking, a promise without a trap. Marsh took the license and folded it. "I'll enter it in the ledger," he muttered. "Tonight," Beckett said. Marsh bristled, then nodded stiffly. At the door, he hesitated and looked back, voice rougher. "Price is already in town," he said. "He won't like losing." Beckett's reply was ice. "Then he can learn to." When Marsh left, Greer finally let herself exhale fully. The cook blinked hard as if trying not to cry, and busied herself with dishes that didn't need washing. Halden lingered long enough to whisper, "Courage isn't loud, ma'am. It just refuses to leave." And then he was gone, too. Beckett took Greer into his office and wrote a sworn statement by lamplight. That he'd known about the name, that he'd consented, that the marriage was entered into willingly. He made Greer read it. Then he made the cook read it. Then he sealed it in a small tin box with the rings, as if vows and proof belonged together. "We send a rider," Beckett said. "Tonight?" Greer asked, startled. Beckett nodded. "To the county judge," he said. "If Price is in town before sunup, then our paper has to be in a judge's hands before he starts buying friends." Greer's chest tightened at the swiftness of it. Fighting smart, not just words. The cook's nephew was young, lean, and half asleep in his coat when Beckett woke him. The boy took the sealed note like it was gold, mounted, and vanished into the dark with a kind of fear that turned into speed. After, Beckett stopped in the doorway of Greer's room. "I'll sleep in the office," he said. Greer's throat tightened. "You don't have to. I want you to feel safe," he said. "And I don't want safety to be something you have to pretend at." Greer nodded, unable to find words that didn't sound too small. Sleep came in shards anyway. At every creak of the boards, her body tried to curl. At every distant sound, her mind tried to run. Dawn brought voices. She came out to find Luther Price standing in her home like he'd always belonged their fine coat, pale eyes, a smile too sharp to be kind. Sloane stood behind him, smooth again, and Marsh lingered at the edge like a man trying to remember which side he was on. Luther's gaze swept over Greer. "Well," he said, "this is the famous bride." Beckett's voice was flat. "You're not welcome." "That's cute," Luther said. "You think welcome matters." Sloane opened his satchel. "We're here to verify the legality of last night's proceedings." Greer stepped beside Beckett. She could feel the heat of him, steady as a wall, but he didn't speak over her. "My name's Greer Whitlock," she said. Luther smiled. "Pretty lie. It's the name I signed," Greer said. "It's the name the county witnessed." Luther's eyes glittered. "Deputy," he said, "show them." Marsh produced a telegram and read it succinct. "Louis, detainment requested. False identity, misappropriation of documents." Greer felt the old fear surge. Then she forced it down. "Requested," she said, "not ordered, not warranted." Sloane's smile thinned. "It is evidence of concern. It's evidence of power," Greer said. "A rich man pushing paper." Luther shrugged. "Rich men push paper. That's how the world runs." Greer's eyes stayed cold. Then the world is ugly. Beckett laid his signed statement on the table, his own declaration, that Greer had told him about her name before the wedding and that he accepted it willingly. Marsh read it, jaw tightening. Sloane tried to pivot legal channels, bank protections. Greer watched Luther's face as Sloane spoke. Luther wasn't listening for truth. He was listening for the moment he could take. And, Sloane said, the bank will freeze your credit. No new feed. No new supplies. Luther's smile widened. You'll starve. Greer's anger rose, not wild, but sharp enough to cut. You're threatening hunger, she said, calm. On Christmas. Business, Luther said. Greer looked at Sloane. How much? She asked. Sloane frowned. How much what? How much is the rope? Greer said. The amount you're using to choke this ranch. Beckett's head turned, warning. Greer, I'm his wife, she said, without flinching. By your precious ledger, Sloane named the sum. It was large. It made the cook's breath catch from the doorway. It made Greer's stomach tighten. But Greer knew what she had saved. She knew the last thread she dekept for herself. Coins tucked into a boarding house tin, wages counted twice, a small bank book with her name on it. Not enough to become rich. Enough to refuse being crushed. She went to her room, returned with her cloth bundle, and laid her bank book on the table, holding it in her own hands so Sloane couldn't snatch it. This is in the name Whitlock, Greer said. A name I have lived under. A name I have earned under. Luther scoffed. You don't have money. Greer's gaze stayed steady. You don't know what I have. Sloane's eyes sharpened, greedy. Proof? Greer held the book up, not offering it. Enough, she said. Enough to buy time. Enough to keep your starvation trick from working. Beckett's voice went rough. No, he said, pride choking him. You don't have to. This is partnership, Greer said. You said you wanted it. Beckett stared at her, jaw tight, then slowly nodded as if swallowing something that hurt. All right. Greer turned back to Sloane and Luther. We ride to town after sunrise, she said. We make copies of the ledger. We meet the county judge. We put my letter from Crane on record. We put Beckett's statement on record. And we do it where your money has to argue in daylight. Luther's smile thinned. You're going to regret this. Greer's voice stayed calm. Maybe, she said. But you'll regret underestimating me. Sloane closed his satchel, face controlled. We will see you in town, he said. With counsel. Beckett's eyes stayed cold. We will. Luther lingered a moment, eyes on Greer like a promise, then turned and left. Sloane followed. Marsh hesitated at the doorway. He looked at Greer, conflicted. You're making enemies, he said. Greer met his gaze. I already had enemies, she said. Now I have a home worth defending. Marsh's jaw tightened. Then he gave a small nod, like a man deciding to at least pretend he had a spine. Bring that Crane letter to the judge, he muttered, and left, the door shut. Quiet poured back in. Greer's knees went weak again. She sat slowly. Beckett crossed to the stove, ladled stew into a bowl, and set it in front of her like a steadying stone. Eat, he said. Greer stared at him. The first time he'd fed her, it felt like rescue. Now it felt like ritual to people refusing to be starved into obedience. She took a bite. Warmth spread through her. Then she broke the cornbread in half and slid a piece across the table toward Beckett. Beckett stared at it like it was something sacred. Greer's voice softened. Your turn. Beckett took it, quiet. He ate. For a moment, they only listened to the quiet, the stove ticking, the house settling. Greer watched Beckett chew like he was learning how to accept help. Then he tore a strip from a ledger page and drew a rough map. The road to town, the creek crossing, the judge's office. We ride soon, he said. Before their paper gets ahead of ours? Then I'm coming, Greer said. She didn't wait for permission. Beckett studied her a beat, then nodded. "All right, but you choose the pace." The cook returned with a scarf and the marriage license copy Marsh left. Greer folded it and slid it into her Bible at Psalms, like a promise. The ink felt warm, as if the vow still breathed in her. Beckett reached for her elbow, paused. "May I?" "Yes," Greer said, and let the touch steady her. Outside, the early light brightened into Christmas morning. Somewhere in the barn, an animal shifted. Somewhere beyond the ranch, men with money were already sharpening paper. Greer touched the ring on her finger plane metal, heavy with choice, and felt something settle deep in her bones. Not safety yet, but the beginning of it. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.